In a quiet suburban neighborhood in the United States, the kind of place where every house looks peaceful from the outside, she is sitting at a small kitchen table covered with unopened envelopes and printed statements. The light from the window falls on a stack of papers: mortgage notice, homeowner's insurance renewal, grocery receipts, a car note reminder, and 2 credit card bills already past due. To anyone walking past, she looks overwhelmed, almost fragile, like someone standing on the edge of collapse under the weight of ordinary life in America. But what they do not see is how carefully her eyes track every number, every due date, every hidden fee that most people never question. She is not guessing. She is calculating cash flow, timing, penalties, and interest rates as if she has been trained inside a bank rather than a small kitchen. Earlier that day, at a small law office downtown, she sat across from a lawyer who assumed she would break down when confronted with foreclosure documents. Instead, she calmly asked for the amortization breakdown, pointing out inconsistencies in the payment history that even the lawyer had to double-check. The room went quiet when she referenced clauses in the mortgage agreement, especially the adjustment terms buried in the fine print. That was the moment people started realizing she was not confused by paperwork. She was reading it like a map. Meanwhile, outside the office, a white billionaire investor who had been observing quietly through an associate's report arrives in an unremarkable black car. He does not interrupt, does not intervene. He simply watches, leaning slightly back as if he is studying a system rather than a person. In his world, financial chaos is usually emotional, but here he notices something different: discipline hidden inside someone everyone else underestimated. Back at home, she spreads out the bills again. Grocery inflation eating into savings, car insurance rising after a minor claim, credit utilization creeping toward dangerous levels. She connects every line to a broader structure: income timing, bank processing delays, penalty windows, and how one missed payment can cascade into systemic debt. When her phone rings with another collection notice, she does not panic. She logs the time and notes the wording used by the caller. The billionaire finally speaks to her through a brief introduction arranged by a third party, but even then, his tone is calm, almost observational, not paternal. He asks her one simple question about the flow of money in her household, and she answers with precision that surprises even him. Yet none of this is about rescue. It is about recognition. He is trying to understand why someone this deep in pressure still reads the system better than those above her. As night falls, she gathers the papers into neat stacks, separating obligations by priority, penalty risk, and negotiation potential. And just when it seems like everything is being understood, she notices something unusual in the mortgage file: an inconsistency in the original payment authorization that should not exist. She flips the page again, noticing that the signature metadata does not match the bank's recorded timestamp, something subtle enough to pass unnoticed unless someone understands how financial institutions log digital authorization trails. The billionaire's expression changes slightly for the first time, not surprise, but confirmation that this is the exact kind of physical evidence that can overturn every assumption built against her. What begins to spread through the neighborhood and the legal office is not clarity, but interpretation, people filling in gaps with their own assumptions. In rooms where her case is discussed, she becomes a symbol rather than a person. And symbols are always simplified. The most common belief is that silence means weakness. She does not argue loudly, does not post online, does not threaten lawsuits in emotional bursts. So people assume she is losing. Another belief follows quickly: if you are not showing money, new clothes, new car, visible upgrades, you must be poor. They confuse appearance with reality, forgetting that some of the most stable financial lives look completely ordinary on the surface. Inside the law office, a junior associate whispers that she probably doesn't even own the house, just lives there. That statement spreads because it feels intuitive, but it is built on a deeper mistake, confusing being inside a system with owning it. Living in a house is not the same as controlling the mortgage structure tied to it. Paying monthly does not automatically mean surrendering understanding of the contract behind it. Yet most people stop at surface logic. If payments are due, you must be the one being controlled. Even outside observers make the same error. They see income statements, assume income equals wealth. They see a stable paycheck and assume stability. But income is not ownership. Income is flow, Ownership is structure. One can disappear in a month. The other continues producing value even when nothing is actively earned. The billionaire watching her case notices this exact distortion in everyone around her. To them, she looks behind because she is not performing success. But he sees something different. She is reading ownership rules while others are watching lifestyle signals. He has seen this pattern before. People who look rich but are trapped in monthly obligations, and people who look ordinary but quietly control leverage others do not understand. At home, she continues organizing documents. Each paper is no longer just a bill. It is a layer of control. The mortgage is not just debt. It is a timeline of ownership transfer. The insurance is not just protection. It is a contract defining liability boundaries. The credit card is not just spending. It is compressed future income already allocated. She sees everything as structure, not emotion. Meanwhile, others interpret her calmness as detachment, even arrogance. They say she doesn't care enough. But that is another mistake, confusing emotional expression with financial awareness. Loud accusations do not equal truth. Quiet documents often do. Ask yourself, how many times have you assumed someone was struggling just because they were quiet about money? How often have you equated visible spending with real wealth, or mistook stress for incompetence? And more importantly, how many systems around you are you judging by appearance instead of structure? The contradiction becomes sharper when the legal office receives another set of claims from the bank's side. They present her situation as standard delinquency, a simple failure to maintain payments. Yet the document she found, the subtle mismatch in authorization timestamps, does not fit that narrative. It suggests something deeper than missed payments, something embedded in the system itself. And that is where the story begins to shift. Because if the problem is not what everyone assumes it is, if she is not simply failing, but instead holding evidence that contradicts the entire financial storyline being told about her, then the real question is no longer about her situation at all. It becomes about the structure behind the mortgage system, the hidden logic that determines who is seen as owner, who is labeled as debtor, and what really happens when the paper trail stops matching the official version of reality. By the time the legal tension begins to spread beyond the small office, the situation is no longer just about one woman and a mortgage. It has become a question of how money actually behaves when you strip away emotions, assumptions, and appearances. The billionaire observer finally breaks his silence in a controlled, almost instructional tone, not speaking to her as a victim, but as someone analyzing a system. He simplifies what everyone around them keeps overcomplicating. Most people misunderstand what money really is doing, he says. They think it sits still. It doesn't. It moves. And whatever controls its movement controls everything. In his framing, there are only a few basic forces. Assets are things that either protect you or put money into your pocket without asking for permission. Liabilities and bad debt are the opposite. They quietly pull money out, on schedule, whether you are aware or not. The average person thinks they are earning, but in reality, they are just reacting to cash flow they don't fully control. Cash flow, he explains, is like invisible employees. If structured well, it works for you even when you sleep. If structured poorly, it drains you even when you work harder. The difference is not effort. It is direction. She listens without interruption because she already understands part of this intuitively. Her eyes are not emotional. They are tracing documents in her mind. She has seen how each paper in her stack represents a different layer of control. The deed, for example, is not just a form. It is the real boundary of ownership. It decides who legally stands behind the property when everything goes wrong. The mortgage statement is not just a bill. It is a schedule of how control is gradually transferred through time. The bank statement is not just numbers. It is a live record of how much freedom remains after every obligation is deducted. The billionaire continues, people argue with feelings, but systems only respond to evidence. That is where the real misunderstanding lies. Emotion feels powerful in the moment, but emotion does not rewrite contracts. It does not erase signatures. It does not override recorded timestamps. Only documents can do that, or confirm that something else is wrong. She begins to connect the structure more clearly now, almost like seeing a map in layers. Insurance policies are not just safety nets. They define who pays when something breaks. Title records are not symbolic. They are legal authority over transfer. Even something like a school file or custody record in family-related systems operates the same way. It determines control, responsibility, and access, regardless of what people feel about fairness. In another file she quietly requested earlier, there is a prenup clause referenced indirectly through a financial crosslink in the legal bundle. It has nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with distribution rules under specific conditions. That alone changes how the entire case could be interpreted if the documentation discrepancy is confirmed. Because here is the deeper mechanism most people never see. Paperwork is not bureaucracy. It is protection. It is the wall between assumption and truth. It decides whether a claim is real or just loud. Outside the office, people still talk as if this is a simple failure of payments. Inside the document she is studying, something very different is forming. A contradiction between what the bank is reporting and what the underlying records quietly indicate. The billionaire glances at the stack again, then at her, as if confirming a pattern he has seen before in other cases where systems do not match their own paper trails. He does not say what he is thinking yet, because one final piece of evidence has not fully entered the room. And when it does, it will not just support her position. It will force every previous assumption to be reevaluated from the ground up, starting with the one document everyone believed was unquestionable. The room feels heavier now, not because of noise, but because of what has been placed on the table without explanation. One by one, the physical pieces of the system are revealed, not as dramatic props, but as quiet confirmations of something already in motion. The deed is the first. It sits inside a worn folder, edges slightly bent from being handled more than once, but the ink is sharp, unambiguous. It does not argue. It does not defend. It simply states ownership structure in a way that overrides everything said in the hallway earlier. Next to it is a bank statement, but not just any statement. A single line is circled in red, not by emotion, but by precision. It highlights a transfer timing that does not align with the bank's official narrative of default. The mismatch is small enough that most people would ignore it, but large enough that someone who understands systems cannot unsee it. On the table beside it lies a phone. The screen is paused on a video recording, a quiet, stable angle from inside a room no one expected to matter. It shows a sequence of events related to authorization and communication that contradicts the simplified version being told in legal arguments. There is no dramatic music, no emotional framing, just time-stamped reality. Across from it, the custody file is opened on the lawyer's desk. It is not directly part of the mortgage dispute, but it connects through financial dependency structures and shared liability records. The prenup, still inside its sealed envelope, rests nearby like a dormant rulebook waiting for the right condition to activate. It is not loud, but it is powerful in the way contracts are powerful, silent until triggered. In her hand, almost unnoticed, at first, are new keys. They are not presented as victory, just as access. And in her wallet, partially visible, is a company badge tied to a financial institution interface role she never emphasized publicly. Each item alone would mean little to outsiders. Together, they form a structure that no single accusation can easily collapse. She does not react the way others expect. There is no shock, no emotional release, no attempt to prove superiority. Her calm is not detachment, it is alignment. Each document is already placed in her mind long before it appears on the table. She is not discovering them. She is confirming them. The billionaire observer notices this more than anything else. He leans slightly forward, not in surprise at the documents themselves, but at the timing. Preparation is what separates reaction from control. In his experience, most people gather evidence when they feel cornered. Very few build it before pressure arrives. She is not improvising. She is executing a sequence. Across the room, the opposing side still misreads everything. To them, she still appears outmatched, quiet, unassuming, lacking visible authority. They assume power is loud, lawyers speaking first, banks issuing final words, institutions defining outcomes. They believe authority is something you hear before you see. But the truth unfolding here is different. Systems do not respond to volume. They respond to structure. And structure is built in silence, long before anyone realizes a conflict has begun. The billionaire finally speaks again, not to challenge anyone, but to underline what is already visible. People think winning is about convincing others, he says. But in finance, winning is about having records that cannot be argued with. The room does not fully understand what that means yet, but the documents on the table are starting to form a pattern even the most skeptical observer cannot easily dismiss. Each piece is a layer of authority that exists independently of opinion. And still, something is missing. Not in the paperwork itself, but in how it will be interpreted once pressure escalates beyond this room. Because when systems collide, bank records, legal claims, family structures, and institutional narratives, truth is not decided by what is present, but by what can survive scrutiny under force. Outside the office, calls begin to increase. Messages multiply. New legal pressure is being prepared, not because the situation is clear, but because it is becoming unstable for those who assumed it was simple. And as the weight of all three forces, family expectations, social interpretation, and legal escalation, starts to converge, one question remains unspoken in the room. When every system is activated at once, which layer will hold, and which one will collapse first? The pressure does not arrive as one single moment. It arrives as a system. First, it is the family. A phone call from her husband's side, calm on the surface but sharpened underneath. Words like responsibility, embarrassment, and what people will think are repeated more than facts. His mother speaks next, not loudly, but with a tone that has been practiced over years of control through expectations. She does not argue about documents. She argues about image. A woman should not bring this kind of attention, she says, as if attention itself is a form of debt. Then come the sisters-in-law, turning private tension into public interpretation. In their version of the story, she is no longer a careful reader of contracts or someone tracking financial inconsistencies. She becomes something simpler, easier to label, unstable, opportunistic, a gold digger, someone who wants more than she deserves. None of it is based on the deed, the statements, or the timestamp mismatch. It is based on discomfort, because someone who understands structure threatens people who rely on appearances. The lawyer, now under pressure from multiple sides, begins shifting language as well, not directly accusing her, but framing her position as emotional confusion, misinterpretation, or overreach. The strategy is subtle. If they cannot disprove the documents, they will question the person interpreting them. In the legal world, perception can temporarily outweigh structure until evidence is forced into full review. Even within the bank's narrative, adjustments are being made. What was once a technical delinquency is slowly being reframed as non-compliance behavior, not because the numbers changed, but because interpretation is being shaped to fit a simpler conclusion. Systems, when pressured, often try to simplify complexity into blame. Outside of formal institutions, social pressure does something even more powerful. Friends, distant relatives, and neighbors begin repeating secondhand versions of the story. And with each repetition, nuance disappears. The quiet woman reading mortgage clauses becomes, in public imagination, someone trying to hold on to a house she cannot afford. The difference between reality and perception grows wider. And yet, she does not react in the way they expect. She does not try to win arguments in conversation. She does not rush to defend herself emotionally. Instead, she continues organizing, updating, and aligning documents. Every call is logged. Every statement is cross-referenced. Every inconsistency is stored, not for immediate confrontation, but for structural clarity. She understands something most people miss. In financial systems, emotional urgency often leads to poor decisions, while patience allows evidence to accumulate into undeniable form. The billionaire observer sees this clearly. To him, the pattern is familiar. People under social pressure often make the same trade without realizing it. They pay money to reduce judgment. They accept unfair debt structures to keep appearances intact. They hold on to homes they cannot sustain just to avoid being seen as failures. They stay in financial arrangements that drain them monthly, because leaving would cost them socially more than it costs them financially. This is the hidden tax of image, paying to be accepted. He watches her carefully because she is not behaving like that. She is not protecting image at the expense of structure. She is doing the opposite. And that reversal is what confuses everyone around her. Because in their framework, stability is defined by approval. In her framework, stability is defined by enforceable truth. The tension escalates further when another layer enters the situation. Legal interpretation begins to collide with family narrative. One side claims moral failure. The other side claims technical default. Neither side is fully engaging with the core issue in the documents she has assembled. And still, she does not chase validation. She is not trying to be seen as right. She is building a position that does not depend on being believed. The billionaire finally leans back, observing the entire structure like someone watching a system reach a critical point. Most people, he says quietly, choose comfort over clarity. Even when comfort is expensive, no one responds, but the sentence lands. Because now the situation is no longer just about who owns what, or who is responsible for which payment. It is about why so many people accept financial pressure simply to avoid social rejection, and what happens when someone refuses to play that game at all. And in the middle of escalating blame, shifting narratives, and growing institutional tension, one question begins to emerge, still unanswered but increasingly unavoidable. Why do those who truly understand money often move in the exact opposite direction of the crowd, even when it makes them look wrong at first glance? The shift happens without warning. There is no dramatic announcement, no raised voice, no emotional climax. Instead, it begins with a single motion. The lawyer opens the central folder and lays every key document flat across the table, as if finally accepting that interpretation is no longer enough. The deed is placed in the center. This time, it is not just glanced at, it is fully read aloud, line by line, including the ownership designation, the registered beneficiary structure, and the recorded authority chain. The language is precise, legal, and irreversible. When the final clause is read, the room changes. Not because it is new information, but because it contradicts the simplified story that has been circulating for days. She is not the secondary occupant. She is not a temporary dependent. She is not what the narrative has been shaping her into. She is legally recorded in the ownership structure in a way that cannot be dismissed by opinion. Then comes the bank statement, the one with the red circle. This time, the auditor, assigned to recheck it, confirms out loud that the payment sequence does not match the delinquency framing previously presented. Multiple payments originated from accounts tied to her financial control history, not the opposing party's simplified claim of neglect. The timeline shows continuity, not abandonment. More importantly, it shows responsibility that was not publicly acknowledged. A different folder is opened next. Credit card records, insurance payments, utility bills, mortgage servicing logs. Each one is aligned on the table like pieces of a system that was never meant to be seen all at once. And then the most critical document appears, the signed authorization file. The signature verification report confirms it. The disputed financial actions were not random or missing. They were executed under a structured authorization chain that had been overlooked in earlier interpretations. The metadata, timestamps, and verification trail all align with her documented control profile. The silence in the room is not emotional. It is procedural. Even the opposing lawyer stops speaking mid-sentence, because there is nothing left to reinterpret without directly contradicting the documents in front of him. The billionaire finally steps slightly forward, not to take control, but to underline what is already undeniable. He looks at the table once, then at her, then speaks in a tone that cuts through every remaining assumption in the room. Money doesn't care who speaks the loudest, he says. It only follows who can prove the structure. No one responds. Because now the hierarchy has been reversed, not socially, not emotionally, but legally and financially. The deed defines ownership. The payment history defines responsibility. The authorization logs define control. And together, they remove every label that was built without evidence. The people who tried to define her by narrative suddenly have nothing that survives contact with documentation. She does not celebrate. She does not argue. She simply watches the system finish correcting itself. But even as the truth becomes visible, the situation is not yet over. Because legal systems do not only recognize truth, they also determine consequence. And once a contradiction between narrative and documentation is officially confirmed, the question is no longer who is right in conversation. It becomes what must happen next under law, under contract enforcement, and under institutional obligation. The aftermath does not arrive like chaos. It arrives like procedure. The first official confirmation comes from the lawyer's office. After re-verifying the deed, payment history, and authorization logs, the legal team is forced to align the case with documented ownership and control structures. There is no dramatic statement, only correction. The file is updated to reflect what the evidence already showed. The recorded rights belong to her under the verified contractual chain. Next, the property management office processes the change. The locks are replaced, not as a punishment or a symbolic act, but as a standard legal security adjustment once access authority is clarified. The technician does not ask questions. He simply follows the updated authorization sheet. Keys are issued according to name on title, not according to assumption or relationship history. At the same time, the bank completes its internal reconciliation. The statement anomalies flagged earlier are formally acknowledged as misclassified in the initial review process. Payment continuity is confirmed. The mortgage account is recategorized under active, compliant structure with corrected attribution of responsibility. In simple terms, the financial institution aligns its record with the actual transaction trail rather than the earlier narrative interpretation. In court review, the judge does not focus on emotion or personal history. The file is examined in layers: title, payments, authorization chain, and supporting financial logs. Each layer reinforces the same conclusion. The contract was not absent. It was misread. And once corrected, it stands on its own authority. The case shifts from accusation to enforcement of structure as written. Meanwhile, those who attempted to frame the situation through narrative rather than documentation lose procedural standing. Not in a dramatic way, but in a legal one. Their claims are no longer the reference point for decision-making. The system does not punish them. It simply stops relying on their version of events. There is no victory speech, no confrontation, no emotional closure delivered by any institution. Only quiet alignment between paper, system, and enforcement. The billionaire observes the entire process without interference. When it concludes, he speaks only once, summarizing what the entire situation has demonstrated. In finance, he says, control never belongs to the loudest voice. It belongs to the clearest record. The room remains still, not because of shock, but because the logic is undeniable. After everything settles, what remains is not conflict, but clarity, and clarity becomes instruction. From this point forward, what matters is not what people feel about money, but what they can prove about it. And the practical lessons emerge quietly, almost like a checklist forming from the residue of the case. Keep every financial document organized, not emotional. Understand whose name is actually on the title, not just who is living in the property. Track real cash flow, not assumed income or appearance-based wealth. Protect bank accounts with awareness of authorization, not trust alone. Never pay money simply to buy social acceptance or silence criticism. And most importantly, never let emotion replace evidence when financial decisions are being challenged. These are not abstract ideas. They are the difference between being assumed in control and actually being in control. As the legal process closes its final internal reviews, one final question remains unspoken in the system, not yet resolved in full public awareness. What does it mean for someone's identity when every assumption about them has been replaced by verified structure? And how does that change the way they will be seen moving forward, even after the case is officially closed? The final stage of the situation is not dramatic anymore. It is quiet, almost uneventful on the surface. But underneath that calm is something far more permanent. Identity has already been rewritten by structure, not opinion. The case is officially closed in procedural terms. Documents have been aligned, records corrected, and ownership fully recognized under the verified legal chain. There is no longer a version of events competing with another version. There is only the documented reality that institutions now operate from. What remains is not conflict, but clarity about how the system actually works. The billionaire does not celebrate or dramatize the outcome. He simply observes the final state of the board, as if a lesson has been completed. When he speaks, it is not to explain the case, but to summarize the principle behind it. People think money is about confidence, he says quietly. But confidence without structure is just noise. Real control is always invisible first. His presence throughout the entire process was never about intervention. It was about recognition, seeing how financial systems behave when documentation is complete and when it is not. The younger woman stands differently now than she did at the beginning of this story. Not because she has changed emotionally, but because her position is no longer interpreted through assumptions. She is no longer defined by what others believed about her situation. She is defined by what the system recognizes: ownership records, payment history, verified authorization, and consistent financial behavior under review. She has learned something most people only learn under pressure. Emotion is often used by others as a tool to redirect attention away from structure. When people cannot challenge your documents, they will challenge your character. When they cannot challenge your numbers, they will challenge your intentions. But none of that replaces evidence. And she no longer confuses the two. The billionaire, still calm and distant in tone, becomes a reference point rather than a rescuer. His role was never to save her from consequences, but to reflect how financial literacy actually operates at a higher level, not through appearance, but through understanding systems before they are tested. Two roles remain clear in this entire sequence. He is someone who understands the hidden language of money, how contracts, ownership structures, and financial behavior define reality long before opinions form around it. He does not react to financial chaos. He reads it. She is someone who learned, under pressure, not to let emotion be substituted for proof, not to allow social pressure, family narrative, or public interpretation to override what is written, signed, and recorded. She learned to trust structure over story. And that is the identity shift the entire story has been moving toward. Because in the end, financial reality does not reward those who explain themselves the loudest. It protects those who can prove their position without needing approval. No further argument is needed. No further defense is required. The system has already done what systems do when documentation is complete. It aligns itself with truth. And the final lesson remains simple, but permanent. Don't try to look powerful. Build a life where truth, assets, and evidence quietly protect you even when you say nothing at all. My SIL used my money for years.